When our body is in that state of dealing with challenges, with a lot of stress, the body deprioritizes making sex hormones. So you can see that if we have a lot of stress, it's not uncommon for our sex hormones to dwindle. So by just managing our stress, thinking about what are our priorities and what's important for us to do at this stage, we can allow the body to also produce the sex hormones that our body depends so much on ideal functioning on.
Welcome to this episode of Sexual Empowerment for Women podcast. And today I'm very happy to introduce Simona Stokes. Simona is a psychologist. She's a cognitive behavioral therapist, certified lifestyle medicine professional. And in 2020, Simona founded the Menopause CBT Clinic, and it's an independent psychology service supporting women with emotional and psychological shifts. We know they're all happening there, right? Of perimenopausal and menopause. And she trains health professionals in menopause-informed psychological care, which is so important. So happy to have you, Simona.
Yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit about the clinic, the Menopause CBT Clinic, and how you came to do this? What's your journey into this?
Okay, the story of getting here. Well, like you said, I'm a psychologist. I've been a mental health professional for 26 years. Gosh, I can't believe it, quarter of a century. So I worked in various kind of settings. And then I got to a point in 2017 when I just had enough of working for others. So I decided I'm going to set up my own psychology consultancy business. And I left my very senior position in our National Health Service. I live in the UK. And I just started doing my thing, just have a small psychology practice. But at the same time, I didn't even realize that I wasn't feeling like myself. And I just felt a bit under the weather. My brain wasn't quite engaging in the same way like before. I was much more anxious, much more, flatter in mood, and just life wasn't necessarily bright for me at that point. So, I was just thinking maybe because I made all these big transition, living paid job, very well paid job, and how the heck am I gonna make it work for myself starting from scratch? But anyway, in 2018, the story goes that I had one client that was coming to see me for therapy. She sat down and she said, I want to have cognitive behavioral therapy for menopause. And I was saying, what? Cognitive behavioral therapy for menopause? Never heard about that. And given that I worked in National Health Service, given that I was commissioning services, you would have thought that I know about guidelines, national guidelines for how psychological therapies could be used for different conditions. But no one has ever mentioned anything about this particular guidelines on how CBT can be used to manage menopausal symptoms. So anyway, when someone asks for something that you think you don't know what's going on, you are curious. So I was curious. So I was asking this lady, well, tell me a bit more about what you are experiencing and let's make sense about it. So it became quite evident. She was talking that, yes, her hormonal changes associated with menopausal transition were causing significant changes in her mental health. And she could track everything. And while she was talking, I had this light bulb moment. Heck, what she's saying, it's what I'm experiencing from my mental health point of view. It was like a light bulb moment for me. And you know what I realized then? That at that point, I was something like 20 years nearly in my professional career. And no one has ever told me about the link between sex hormones and mental health. And I had training galore, and I worked with some very bright people in psychological field. I'm the kind of curious person that always reads about things, and always I'm going off-piste in terms of exploring different things. And there I was, 2018, May, sitting down with this woman, asking me for CBT for menopause, and just realizing I don't know anything about this. And secondly, actually, that's really something that floored me during that period. And in hindsight, I can say, hand on heart, it contributed in part to my decision to leave my employed position. So that sent me down the rabbit hole. It sent me down the rabbit hole of trying to find out more. What's all of these things? How can menopause affect mental health when really all that you hear about is that, yes, your period stops, you might have some hot flashes in a process, and yes, then you get on with your life and nothing changed.
I really want to know. So now how? So tell us how, menopause, perimenopause affects mental health. Like, what did you find out in that rabbit hole of yours?
Oh, it's so much. It's so much. I started looking far and wide in research, in studies, endocrinology studies, in different kind of academic studies, in neuroscience. I looked into lifestyle medicine kind of studies. And what I found is basically, although we think about menopause as related just to our reproductive health, our reproductive health, it's controlled by our brain. So it's the brain that actually starts our periods when we are in puberty. The ovaries are there latent, ready to produce eggs when the time is right. But actually the brain initiates the message that now you are ready. You should start ovulation. And the brain releases a peptide called kiss peptide that actually stimulates the ovaries, and then the ovaries starts to produce eggs.
How do the brain decide it's the time?
Well, it's a biological clock.
Yeah.
And are many factors that get to that point where the brain thinks, okay, everything is ready. So as you can see, although we are thinking about sex hormones as controlling our reproduction, to a point, it does, but really the whole process is directed by the brain. So when we get to perimenopause, our ovaries are preparing for retirement. They don't turn up to work, so they just think, oh, I had enough of this production of eggs and estrogen and progesterone. I'll take a day off, or 2 or 3. So when that happens, our sex hormones drop significantly because the ovaries are producing the majority of estrogen and progesterone and even testosterone in our body. So then when the hormones are not there, the brain is asking, where is my fuel? Where is my fuel? So then it pushes, it releases a lot of different enzymes, and it's a very complex process. And it releases different hormones to stimulate, to push harder the ovaries to produce the goods. And then the ovary says, okay, then if I'm so essential, I'll come back to work, but it's overproducing. So what's happening, it's overproducing estrogen, that's sometimes way higher than the normal baseline that we have in fertile years. So that kind of overproduction of estrogen really unsettles the brain. The main fuel for female, yes, estrogen is the fuel for the female brain. So when, we're going in a perimenopause, this fuel is not consistent, therefore the brain is struggling. And as the brain coordinates so many functions, our thermoregulation, the thermostat for our body, it's in a brain, and it's very dependent on estrogen. So you can see that then it's no surprise that we get hot flashes. Then our emotion center, it's in the brain. When our emotion center doesn't get enough estrogen, we get anxious, our mood flattens. Our decision-making process is driven by the brain. So again, when estrogen levels are unpredictable, they are volatile, women start having problems to make decisions, to think straight, to concentrate, to focus. Then memory centers are in the brain. And again, when estrogen levels change, the memory is just like affected. women talk about. Oh, I can't remember, I'm going in a room, I don't know why, or I can't get my words out. So you can see the relationship between the hormonal levels, sex hormone levels, and the brain. And therefore, we can start seeing loads of mental health difficulties associated with that process.
Can you explain how is it the estrogen the fuel for the brain?
It's biology. That's how we've been made up. Like the car works with petrol or diesel, in the same way, our body has been made up to function on estrogen.
And is it just for women?
Yes. Well, all human beings have got estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone, men and women, but we have them in different quantities. In women, estrogen is the dominant kind of hormone that is supporting our biology. For men, testosterone is the predominant hormone that supports their biology, but they still have estrogen and progesterone as well in very small quantities. And that's how we work. So obviously, during the perimenopause, as our estrogen levels just reduce significantly, and not only that they reduce, they are volatile initially. That causes havoc in our body and in our brain, and therefore we see a lot of physical symptoms like hot flashes, night sweats, joint ache, what else? Muscular problems, urinary tract infections. You can see all kinds of physical symptoms. But then, as I said, the brain is going to struggle, and we are going to see a whole host of mental health symptoms. Okay. Well, what happens is that we are going through this period of perimenopause that can last between 4 to 7 to 10 years, and sometimes even longer. And the body eventually will adapt to the lower level of estrogen and progesterone. But it's a very rocky ride. Now, we know that something like 20% of the women would experience mild symptoms. 50 to 60% of women would experience more moderate to severe symptoms, and 20% of women can have very severe symptoms related to perimenopausal transition. But yes, generally, most of us get over this hump that can take 10 years, and our body and our brain, it's adapting to the low level of estrogen. And then we're moving forward towards our later years in life, where generally the mood stabilizes and we're feeling much more positive about life. But not always. For some women, by the time they get to postmenopause, the process of accelerated aging and cognitive decline can start taking hold. That's influenced by many factors, genetic factors, but also lifestyle factors. So how we are moving through the perimenopause and beyond depends on also how we take care of ourselves.
And I wonder, Simona, because there is this, I guess, an alternative view, right? That the menopause, it's actually the rite of passage to move women more into their power. It's not a medical condition, but actually it's something that's very natural happens in the body. And if we really work with that, we can start to feel more empowered, more wise.
Well, you have to realize that menopause is a biopsychosocial cultural event. So it fits into so many categories. Once it's a biological event because it's something that happens to our biology. And those kind of biological changes, like I said, affect the brain. So menopause, it's a neurodynamic transition. So affects our brain, our neurology, yeah? Then menopause, it's an inflammatory event. So estrogen has the role as an anti-inflammatory role. So it keeps the lead on body inflammation. Now, inflammation, it's a very important process that's linked to our immunity, but when inflammation gets out of hand, it can become very detrimental, and it's linked to developing a whole host of conditions of old age, like cardiovascular disease, diabetes, osteoporosis, and cognitive decline. And then menopause, it's a metabolic shift. So our metabolism is changing. But last but not least, menopause, it's a psychological developmental stage, like puberty is, like pregnancy is, and then perimenopause comes along. That means that many women at this stage of life, they are starting asking themselves, who am I now? Here I am in my 40s, maybe 50s, and they start reevaluating what matters to them, what are the priorities, what's their purpose. Many women might be at that stage where kids might be leaving her. Women might have the responsibility of care for their elderly parents and relatives. They are caught into these family dynamics. Many women in their 40s, 50s, they are building a career or they are at the peak of their career. So there are many pressures that would make women get to this point and start asking themselves, what is it that I need, I want now? How do I want to live my life, given that here I am probably midpoint, and trying to reconsider how they can take charge of that process. So some women during this time, they can become more empowered and make choices that align with what matters to them. But some women, they feel very stuck within this life stage. And sometimes they can continue on a same pattern of doing things like they've done before, always putting everyone else's needs above theirs and ending up very depleted.
Can we talk about sex a bit? And sexual desire, what do you see? How does it? Oh, I see the smile.
Yes, well, we cannot talk about sexuality and midlife women without taking into consideration hormonal changes. Now, our sex organs are all supported by good levels of estrogen. When estrogen levels become very volatile and dwindling eventually, our sex organs are just going to struggle. So I'll start with, let's say, urinary tract infections that become much more recurrent during the perimenopause for some women because of estrogen protecting our genitourinary system. And then vaginal dryness, it's something that happens very often for women as they progress through the perimenopause in postmenopause, because again, the vaginal tissue, it's supported by estrogen level. And in those kind of conditions, without getting into a lot of medical details, when the vaginal tissue becomes very dry, it's much more fragile. In that kind of circumstance, the sex can become very painful, uncomfortable. And although women can still love their partners or be interested in sex to a point, their functioning is not the same. And therefore, the sexual pleasure can be diminished. But also estrogen and testosterone, that are again two sex hormones that women have, and they are produced by the ovaries, libido can be affected. So again, it's not uncommon for women in midlife to lose their libido. And they lose their libido not because they don't love their partner, not because they are not interested in intimacy, but the spark is gone. I hear many women talking like, I couldn't care less about sex. It's just not on my mind. It just, okay, sometimes it's something to do just to get over with and just to keep my partner satisfied. But that's really the biology that dictates how we engage with sexual activity and with our sexual desire. So probably as well as I know that sexuality, it's impacted by so many factors. It's impacted by biology. It's impacted by psychology, like how women find their partner attractive. What are maybe their hang-ups about sexuality? We all carry different kind of beliefs, maybe from younger years, from even adolescence and childhood, what sex means. Many women can have a lot of shame attached to sex. It's something about mindset and how we allow ourselves to enjoy sex. But last but not least, there is all these external factors that contribute to how we see sex. There are women that might think about sex, it's just something for younger people, because you see it happening much more often on movies when people are young, not people in their 50s and 60s and beyond. Then there can be issues in a relationship with partner. So those kind of difficulties, again, could have a knock-on effect on woman's desire for sexual activity. So as you can see, we can't really separate everything and just think that it's just about mindset. Biology has got a lot to do with our sexuality, as well as psychology and the context of our lives.
Well, what's important that it's not just biology, because quite often women come and they're like, it's biology, I'm menopausal, and that's why I lost my desire. And what I see is actually the more we do the practice I teach, like the sacred sexuality practices, the more they can actually start connecting, and they can start to see that actually hormonal disbalance wasn't their only influence, and they can shift it once they start to practice and pay attention to their sexuality, once they start to really connect to that spark inside. So I wonder, because it sounds like it sounds like it's all bad news. Can you give me some good news? Like, how do you help?
The good news is that we can understand more and work on this psychological dimension of the sexuality. Like I said, our sexuality is not only biology, it's psychology and social context. So we can work on psychology, and sounds like that's what you are doing in your work. And women then can maybe work on their social context, like who do they want to be with? How do they seek intimacy in their lives? But we cannot neglect the biology. And when it comes to biology, now some women might go on hormone replacement therapy or menopausal hormone therapy, as it's called in New Zealand and in America. Here in the UK, we call it hormonal replacement therapy. So hormone replacement therapy can put back the estrogen, the progesterone, and even the testosterone in a system, so rebalances the body, and therefore the sex organs and the body functions more like it did when we had our own production of estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone. But also it's very important to realize that even if women don't go on this systemic hormone replacement therapies, there are still formulation of estrogen only that are used locally. So that means that they don't have an effect on the whole of the body, but locally it's product of estrogen that can be applied at genital level, and that can help a lot in terms of increasing sensitivity, increasing, keeping the tissue moist and plump and ready for intercourse, if that's something that someone is interested in. So all of those things do depend also on this kind of local feed of estrogen, and that can help a lot. And this kind of local estrogen can be used even by women that have had breast cancer, where the hormone replacement therapy generally is contraindicated. But this local estrogen doesn't do anything to increase the risk of breast cancer for women that already had some history of that. So there are good news. We can do a lot.
How do you help? What is it that you do? How do you help with CBT?
Well, my work generally, in the first instance, it's highlighting the biological context, the psychoeducation, a little bit like I've done here with you, telling you more, because a lot of women feel like I'm losing my marbles and what's happening with me? I am not interested in this situation, in intimacy, in sex, I dread it. So just by understanding that something is happening biologically, puts their mind at rest a little bit. It's like, oh, I'm not going mad. This is part and parcel of this hormonal transition. But then we really work on a psychology in some respect, what you are doing, like trying to understand what are the cognitive processes, what are the thoughts that we engage with when it comes to intimacy, and then just trying to reframe all of that thinking, working on a mindset. Again, I said about some women think, oh, sex, it's only for young people. I don't need sex. What's the point of all of that? I've got my kids. Work on that. Also, from cognitive behavioral therapy, we can work on trauma. Many women carry trauma that is related to sex life. It can be trauma in respect to sexual abuse. It can be trauma related to childbirth. It can be related to trauma around generally sex and sexuality. So there, again, CBT can do a lot of work. And then, yes, talking in CBT about the interactions, the connection, the relationships with partners, and then working on how to accept one's body. Many women going through the menopause are struggling with self-image, self-identity, self-confidence. So in CBT, we work a lot on really building up one's confidence and self-esteem and helping women love, accept their bodies as they are at this stage of life.
That's an important. So when Simona, so if I hear you right, you look on psychological factors, but not on actually the brain fog, the hot flashes. That's not part of what you do, right?
No, actually, we can do.
Yeah.
Yes, we can do a lot even about those things. The hot flashes and the night sweats and brain fog even, they do depend on a lot of lifestyle factors. And when women understand what's the correlation between what they do and how they feel, they are much more inclined and determined to take control of those life factors. You are saying, let's talk about brain fog. Brain fog, yes, in some respect, is driven by these hormonal changes, the brain not getting the right fuel or in the right quantity. But also brain fog can be caused by sleep problems. Now, are many women that are thinking that sleep is something that they don't want, they don't need.
I'm saying sleep is my hobby.
Okay, that's fantastic. That's very good for your physical and mental health. But for some women, sleep is not a priority. Now, the more sleep deprived we are, the more our brain fog would feel overwhelming. It's increasing our brain fog. If we eat a lot of junk food, that's going to contribute to brain fog. If we have a sedentary lifestyle, that's going to contribute to brain fog. If we don't eat enough water, that's going to contribute to brain fog. If we drink too much alcohol, if we drink too much caffeine, if we have a sweet tooth and we eat a lot of sweets, all of those things can contribute, can increase, amplify the brain fog symptom. So then when women realize, oh, there are things I can do to dial down the brain fog, they will do that. And then talking about psychoeducation, when they understand how menopause hormonal therapy can help them, they might consider even going down that path. So as you can see, I, as a psychologist, have quite a lot of input in educating women. And when they have the information, then I can support them to change their behavior in these areas of their life. Change, it's hard. It's common sense. Yes, okay, I need to drink more water, but it's not common practice always because it's difficult to change certain behaviors. And then as a psychologist, part of my training is to support behavioral change. And then with my tool bag, I'm helping these women to carry out certain activities that would help them change their behaviors, turn a new behavior into a habit, into a healthy habit.
So that makes sense, right? So you help women to actually understand, yes, the biological factors are there, but there are many other factors, and how once they understand what the factors are, how they're contributing, then you help them to change them. Even though we know biology is there, but actually there's so much more that we can do about it. So if I hear that women are not powerless in that, I quite often feel like this is where I'm at and I can't do anything about it.
Yes, absolutely. So their education is very important. And in menopause-informed psychological care, a term that I coined, it's psychoeducation plays a very important role. So therapy traditionally was very much based on reflection, exploration, insight, and holding the space for someone to find their own answers. Now, obviously, that still has a role to play in this menopause-informed psychological care, but it's not the whole of the story, because a woman cannot really uncover the answers to this biological side unless they are told. It's very unlikely for anyone to have a light bulb moment and make sense of it and how to sort it out on their own, unless we give them information that are pitched at an appropriate level. It helps them see that, yes, this is happening here, but there are so many other things that contribute to how I feel. Let's take control of those areas.
Beautiful. Yeah. If you feel into a woman who's in your situation, remember how you were when you started your business and you feel the brain fog and all the factors, and maybe she feels a bit lost, yeah?
Yeah.
What can you say to her? What would be your message to her?
Well, my message is that you have a lot more control than you think you are. And even managing our own stress can have a positive impact on our hormone levels. There are some biological processes by which, when the body is under a lot of stress, the body prioritizes making cortisol rather than making the sex hormones. Because if you are thinking evolutionary, the body knows how to prioritize our survival. When we are in a situation of stress, the body says, okay, we need more cortisol, because the cortisol, it's the hormone that puts us in a position to push through difficulties, to find solutions to the challenges that we are dealing with. But when our body is in that state of dealing with challenges, with a lot of stress, the body deprioritizes making sex hormones. So you can see that if we have a lot of stress, it's not uncommon for our sex hormones to dwindle. So by just managing our stress, thinking about what are our priorities and what's important for us to do at this stage, we can allow the body to also produce the sex hormones that our body depends so much on ideal functioning on. So there it is. It's a very simple process.
And what I see, the stress, the being self-critical, how that's so stressful. It's like we have the tiger inside of us when we have active inner critical voice, and I work a lot with that. Yeah, we're so stressed. And actually, when we can start loving ourselves and actually start to transform the critical voice, it changes so much. Then the desire for sex appears as well. And it makes sense, right, with the biology.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But what you are talking there, it's about this self-compassion, because sometimes we can be our worst enemies, and that internal voice can be hypercritical. And when that hypercritical voice is dictating how we're thinking and how we're feeling, it's just increasing the internal stress for us. Yeah. And obviously, by going through that process, it's just detracting from enjoying life, because nothing that we are experiencing it's good enough according to our inner critic. And we constantly beat ourselves up. So by building a better relationship with ourselves, I don't want to sound too cheesy, but loving ourselves allow us to experience life in a different way.
Yeah, it seems, I don't know, cheesy, or like it's so everyone talks about it, but it's such a real thing, huh? So I wonder, we can talk and talk. Any questions you have for me? Yeah, because you've shared so much. I really appreciate, and I think women will really appreciate.
Okay. Well, how do you work with sexuality in midlife?
You talked about psychoeducation. So I love to do group work. That's why I love group work, because in group work, like when I work one-on-one with clients, it's more therapy, following them, what's happening for them. But in group work, I can teach quite a bit. And then I go through 5 steps. My model is a sexually empowered radiant woman model, and I take women through 5 steps through the group work with a lot of interactions. We do it live, everyone is there, women share a lot. I do lots of breakout rooms, but we go from first step is to I call it activate your potential, to actually really start seeing what is the new story. Yeah, who is this woman I'm becoming? And that psychological piece. So, okay, I've been playing all these roles and it's exhausting, it's dissatisfying, and I've done enough of that. Who am I becoming? So that's the first step where I feel like it's so important. Even when women get that step, there's so much more possible. They're like, wow, I can be someone, I can create a life that actually feels good for me. So that's step one. I look at past traumas, I look at inner critic, we transform inner critic into support figure, and also I look at transgenerational patterns, the patterns that I carry from parents, how they affect me now. And I just done a session on Tuesday this week when we went through this big process with women, and they found it so empowering to say this ends with me, and to actually, okay, what am I creating? All the stories, all this trauma, I don't want to carry it anymore. So that's step two. Then in step three, we go into connecting to the body, like as you talk, the body love, how to really come back home, because quite often women live up here, and then if we live up here, we can't feel sexual desire there's nothing there, right? So coming back into the body. But quite often if they had trauma, or because we're in such a high achieving culture, it might not feel safe to be in the body. So I really take women, how can we feel safe? How can we come back home? And I've developed 8 body blueprints. So how women relate to their body, to their sexuality, every woman got some blueprints. And we can, for example, one is machine operator, where I treat my body as a machine. I feed it, but there's no love there. Another blueprint is pleaser blueprint, where I just use my body to please everyone else when women have sex when they don't want to. So, and then how can we shift it into my body as my home? So does make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. What you're describing to me mirrors so much one stage of the menopause informed CBT framework that I developed, which is called Embers. So Embers, it's an acronym. It's a metaphor for how women can feel going through the menopause, like the glowing embers of their former self still burning beneath the surface. But also it's an acronym for 6 areas that I believe need addressing from psychological point of view for women to regain their health and well-being during the perimenopause. And in Embers, the B stands for becoming. And the becoming stage, it's very much about identity, self-concept, and we covered pretty much what you are talking about. Obviously, I don't have the same approach. I don't talk about these blueprints that you describe, but I'm very interested in that. Yeah. And I can see how basically our work, it's overlapping, at least from this becoming stage, which is about self-concept and identity in perimenopause and beyond.
Yeah. And so, but then I go, so the step 4 is ignite the power of your sexuality. So I do a lot of sacred sexuality practices where I take them through the embodied practices where they start connecting to their body. Really powerful practices where women start to feel the desire and spark again. Not just thinking about it, not imagine it, but actually physically start to feel it. And women say through the course, they start like, oh, I start to feel something. I thought it's completely dead, but I start to feel something. That's why I feel the power of kind of my sacred sexuality practices comes in. So it's not about therapy, or it becomes more about the practice, the embodied sense. And then I call create your radiance maps. The next step is through the practice that every woman has some practice specific to her that unlocks something within. And it really depends where she's at, how she relates, how's her past. And because I talk about like the sexually empowered radiant woman, I talk about 5 aspects. It's relationship to your value, relationship to your body, relationship to your pleasure and sexuality, relationship to others, and relationship to your self-expression. And so we look what is the area that women need to focus on. One big piece I find is actually becoming friends with anger, because I see that anger is part of passion, and that's where women, when they shut down the anger, they get resentful, frustrated, and they become like this old dried prune.
Yeah. Well, it's fascinating what you are doing. In my work, I don't necessarily dive very deep into sexuality.
Yeah, I feel like how you compliment me is that you've got so much more the medical knowledge, which I'm more focused on psychology rather than biology of it, which is very useful to know the biology. Yeah. And then I go, into sexuality as well. And I'm also, because I'm trained in emotionally focused therapy for couples, so I work with couples a lot and I can see how relational dynamics, sometimes they say, oh, just menopause. And then when we start talking, actually, they don't talk to each other. There's no emotional connection. And so it's not just about hormones, but actually they need to rebuild that.
No.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But sometimes when women go through the perimenopause and they find, for example, they lose their libido or they find sex uncomfortable, they feel ashamed to speak to their partner about this. And that silence creates a space where different stories can be made up by each of the partner. It's not uncommon for partners to think, oh, she doesn't love me anymore, she's not interested in me, she's gone off me, and then he starts feeling more withdrawn and detached from the relationship, and then she reads the messages like he's not interested in me anymore. But if they were to speak about what's happening, they can bring them together. It can start with biology, creating a discomfort that then it's very difficult to express openly and honestly in a relationship, and that can have a knock-on effect on a relationship.
Yeah, and that's a big piece. And I see just today, like I was working with couples, and how men start to feel so rejected and unwanted. And then if they're doing to the heart connection through sexuality, then they completely disconnect and they can't give those emotional conversations and emotional intimacy to a woman. And then they just go in different directions. Only if we can talk, but quite often it's so difficult. So that's why there's so much shame and guilt. And that's why I sit with couples actually. Can we talk? And it helps so much. What is your last message to the listeners and where they can find about you if they want to do some work? Do you work online with people?
So I do work online. I work with women from all over the world. They can find me online. Just Google Menopause CBT Clinic. I'm on Instagram as well, although I'm not that active. On Instagram, you'd find me as Simona Stokes. And then I'm on LinkedIn, again, under my own name. I do work with women clinically, and a lot of my work over the past couple of years has been dedicated in training professionals in menopause CBT work in this model that I have developed in the Embers model. And again, like every year, I run the training for professionals once, twice a year. I've had people from all over the world coming and training with me in this particular model that I have developed. And again, generally people find me just Googling. Professionals, they find me just looking for training for mental health professionals in menopause. And then women find me just when they are looking for CBT for menopause, which is cognitive behavioral therapy for menopause.
Do you have like a free gift or something for women? Can they sign up and get something to get a taste of what you do, how you work?
Well, there are loads of free downloads on my website. So if they go on Menopause CBT Clinic, they can download this free information sheets on managing sleep in menopause, managing anxiety in menopause, getting back your glow, your inner glow, rather than not how you look, but how you feel. So there are some psychological steps, tools that everyone can, implement in order to feel better. So those are some of the things that I'm doing. I'm not running any webinars at the moment because I've been very caught with this professional training. And yes, if anyone is reaching out to me via the website, via my email address, I always offer a 20-minute free consultation, just having a talk about their circumstances and how my work might be a good fit for what they experience.
Okay, thank you so much, Simona. So beautiful talking to you. And listeners, I'll see you next week. Bye.
Great.